Hi guys, welcome to this next episode of Ashley's Digital China. Today I bring you another phenomenal guest. His name is Mark Greeven. He is a professor of innovation and strategy and a CEO of IMD China. He's been researching, teaching and consulting in China for the past decade. He is now based in Shenzhen and of course he speaks great Mandarin. Hi Mark, fantastic to have you on the show.
So nice to be here. Thank you, Ashley, for having me. Looking forward to our conversation.
Me too. And it is particularly exciting because we are just past Chinese New Year, which is the start of the new Feng Shui cycle. And it is also a year of dragon, wooden dragon, in fact. And a lot of people expect in the year of dragon and the start of this new Feng Shui cycle, they expect a lot of change and innovation and growth. And these are exactly your topics, right? So you started your career in China, with China, in innovation, with academia a while back. First of all, tell us your story.
So yeah, it's absolutely one important feature of, I think, my career and China is change, right? Dynamics. And it's actually one of the reasons why I wanted to study and understand more of Chinese companies, Chinese entrepreneurs in the context of a changing China, right? So I actually started my work on Chinese economy and the private sector in about 20 years ago, actually, so 2004. And it was kind of like by coincidence that I ended up in China. So I was this very, very young PhD student and had an interest in management innovation and innovation studies at the business school. And then I met this professor and the professor that became my PhD supervisor, Barbara Crook, and she is like this early stage, China economist, and in particular focused on China's political economy, went to China in the 1970s and 80s and talked about the private sector. So when I heard her talk about this, I'm like, oh, this is really cool. I want to study with you. So I said, okay, I want to study with you. But I said, I'm not sure about China. Can I go to somewhere else, like Silicon Valley or somewhere? And he says, no. If you want to know what's going to happen in the future, that's going to have an impact in the world when it comes to entrepreneurship, innovation, technology, she said, you have to go to China. So, and then I'm like, okay, great. I go to Shanghai. He says, no, you're not going to Shanghai.
No, you don't.
No. I ended up in Hangzhou, so which is, of course, a beautiful city, right? The West Lake, the mountains, the tea, the Longjing famous green tea, but of course also the home of a couple of really interesting companies like Alibaba. So I ended up there and in the PhD program and studies with studying Chinese innovation by Chinese companies. So that's how it started, and I got interested. And I tell you, the moment that I was there, I was lucky to meet a lot of entrepreneurs in 2004, 2005 to get started. And I was like, okay, something is happening here, And this is before Alibaba was big, or before everybody talked about Huawei, or when German car companies come to us and say, how about the EVs in China? So this is pretty much 20 years ago, right? So it was innovation China. I was a bit like, I'm not so sure. So, and then I was like, okay, see some little seeds here and there. Let's go to study. And that's why I wanted to be an academic. I wanted to really study and understand, different sectors, different type of companies, different parts of China, right? China's a big place. To really get sort of a robust understanding of innovation in that context. So that drove me to China. So thanks to this wonderful professor at my school in the Netherlands.
Yeah, it's always that one fateful event that can totally pivot a life, professional and personal. You've been living in China for quite some time right now, so it is both, I'm sure, a personal and professional love affair. When you talk about Chinese innovators or innovations, let's name a few names, because you've mentioned Alibaba, but there's, Ping An, there's Pinduoduo, there's Haier. Like, who do you consider, after all these years of research, the Chinese innovators, and why?
That's a really good question. And actually, it keeps changing. So my list of companies that I follow is a kind of a dynamic list. I think that's the best way to say it. But there's a few companies out there that I think across the different decades, over the different challenges that they face domestically or internationally, kind of consistently show innovation, right? And yes, the internet companies, the Tencents and the Alibabas are certainly on that list. And in fact, when we do research, they still end up at the top of our rankings. But it is also companies like BYD, right? Like CATL in battery technology. It is companies like Hikvision, right? Which are globally probably number one or two in security and really complicated technology solutions for companies that are maybe not so well known, but they have been there and going at it for 20 years at least and consistently. So these are companies I definitely look at from a business model point of view, from a technology point of view. But I also like companies like, when you think about the CATL or you think about a Haier, or even if you think about a Huawei, people always think about their products, right? And the things that they produce, but they're actually fascinating. If you open up these boxes, you find out that they innovate actually a lot internally, right? A lot of their management systems, their ways of organizing, the way they think about motivating and building talent, they're quite innovative actually. And that fascinates me. And increasingly in the last decade or so, actually we start to look a little bit less at pure product technology, and we're actually starting to look at, hey, management innovation. Could we pick up a couple of things that might benefit, managers and leaders in other parts of the world? So that's, if you think about innovation, I think that's for me, it's a couple of the names that we look at and certainly follow very, very closely.
Very cool. I love it how you also name somebody like, as you said, BYD or CATL that are less known. And I think what China does incredibly well, as you pointed out, is business model innovation. And very often these are bubble tea brands or the brands that produce cosmetics. So their products might or might not be so innovative. I mean, you could just add more or less sugar and maybe blend some coffee or spice shot into your drink. But the way you run a business model, right, internally, externally, that's what we call new consumption brands, right? Because they are truly built for 2024 and beyond. So a lot of also players there in that field. You are, apart from being an academic, as you've mentioned, you are an author of a couple of books. I have one of them right here with me. This is not the only one, but one of the series. So in your book, you say that there are 6 major ways that Chinese entrepreneurs innovate. So let's go through them one by one, right? So you talk about the swarm innovation. You talk about tinkering for fast trials and learning. You talk about strong customer focus and quick technology, rapid centralization for decision making, and of course the network mindset. So walk us a little bit through these 6 major ways Chinese entrepreneurs innovate.
Yeah, I love it, and thanks for looking at the book. We were very pleased when it got out with MIT Press, and then we was like, we really hope that a lot of people are gonna read it because there's a lot of hidden stuff in there, right? Like there's a lot of hidden innovation in China, and the different factors that you mentioned just now. In a way, we could describe them as the Chinese innovators' way, if you like, and I think actually the beauty of it doesn't sit independently in like one new trick or one new thing here. It's this combination of approaching innovation in a slightly different way than we see in other parts of the world. And so I walk you through a few things, and then we can pick up on what makes sense. And the one that I kind of like most, and this is work we've done with George Yip, one of my mentors in school, and we came up with the idea of swarm innovation. And what is that swarm innovation? So it's the idea of, when we're looking at different sectors, we saw that companies and entrepreneurs, once they find an opportunity, let's say a good product market fit, could be for a product to the consumer, and Chinese consumers are very, very sophisticated. Not easy to find the right mix, the right business model, the right product. And you find out you find one company sort of cracking the code, and then you will see 10, 50, 100 other companies going after that same, more or less that same opportunity. And what happens in this is not a game of copy paste. This is a game of hyper competition where we're trying, with new technologies, with better value propositions, with different positionings to really massively sort of in a swarm compete around that opportunity. And then, as you know, many of them will not make it, but the collective pushing of the boundary of capabilities, innovations, value propositions is massive. So the 1 or 2 or 3 winners typically are not just, good and nice for the Chinese market. They're actually really strong competitors globally, right? And examples these days, look at the world of EVs, electric vehicles. Hundreds of companies going after the opportunity. Many of them will not make it, but the ones that make it, oh wow, they're going to be global contenders. So I think that's, for me, a swarm innovation. It sounds a little like some bees and all of that going on, but it is, I think, a very powerful one.
Absolutely. And I think it also goes a little bit with the Chinese, let's say, business sense and setup, right? Because very often when we look in the West, let's say collective West, we see, let's take an easy example, a food street. So on that food street, there is one stall that sells noodles. The other one sells bubble tea. The other one sells, I do not know, cake. And so people go there and they can have this great experience on that street to have some food and snacks and entertainment and take some pictures, etc. But in China, we have bubble tea streets. When there's a street with 100 stalls of bubble tea. There's nothing else.
Exactly.
There's no cake. Well, maybe there's occasional cake somewhere, but ultimately it's one after the other, stores after stores after stores, and people queue up for the most famous ones. A little bit like, like the sushi market in Tokyo and somewhere else. You go there and you're going to get, you can buy fresh sushi, you can eat in all the sushi restaurants. Very, very similar. So what you are ultimately talking about, this swarm innovation, is really also bringing out the Chinese way of doing it. And
Right.
also in the West, a lot of mindset is, okay, if somebody needs a cake, they might need flowers and they might need a tea. But in China, they say, we are all in this together. So we're going to make this street the go-to place for bubble tea. So we all,
Exactly.
when the queue for our neighbor is too long, we all are going to benefit. So even if I'm the worst bubble tea seller on the street, I'm still going to make money.
It's absolutely fascinating, actually, because this mindset is, as you said, it's a mindset, right? And it is probably somewhere also a little bit culturally informed, and it appears to work over a long period of time. And I think it is a really interesting way, because sometimes people misunderstand it as, lack of creativity, right? Why not go for different opportunities? Why not go from milk tea to coffee? But actually, the creativity sits in very much detail. Like, how can I be a little bit better? And this actually is really important, right? Because if you want to win in the market, especially in the consumer market, you will just want to be an inch ahead of your competition. It's okay, you're done, right? So it's not like massively breakthrough different. And it's okay. So I really like that. It's fascinating, and you can almost predict. We had it with the shared bikes for a while back. Right? We had it with the battery pack sharing, and now we see similar patterns in EVs and other markets. Bubble teas and coffees. Coffees is an increasingly interesting business.
Shanghai is #1 city in the world by the number of coffee shops, right? So it's just getting started. Let's continue with this list, and we'll probably feature 1 or 2 more given our time.
Sure.
But how about strong customer focus? So customer centricity is not unique to China. So how is China uniquely positioned to capture the customer experience?
Yeah, so it's a really good point, actually, because what happened, we saw across different organizations and companies, both business to business, but also business to consumer, that companies, and especially the leaders of the companies, the entrepreneurs, the executives, were obsessed, not with the product. They were obsessed about, will they buy it? Will they like it? How much can I charge? Should I change this? And that obsession, and I've talked to literally hundreds of entrepreneurs. It was kind of consistent. So I was like, but customer centricity, as you say, is not unique to China. So then we embarked on a study. So we actually was a study together with MIT. We published, I think maybe a year or 2 ago, where we said, are companies in China, the successful innovators in China, are they now really closer to the customer or not? And we find out, global data set, we find out exactly. Only in China, you have to be so close to be able to win, not winning the consumer, but winning an innovation. And why that is happening is actually that the role of the customer, sometimes the consumer, in the innovation process is much more closer connected than you typically see in other parts of the world. And you'll find some of these patterns in Silicon Valley, in Eindhoven, in the Netherlands, but the scale by which this has become such a norm for Chinese innovators is almost like, the customer, the consumer is not an extension or the outcome of my innovation process. In fact, they're part of this. And the more they're part of it, the better we get their understanding, their needs, and all of that. And we really make them part of that process. So I think that customer centricity, while specifically involving and engaging the customer in the process of innovation. And I think that's a kind of a unique thing. And we actually have evidence that it is a unique thing, at scale in China, which leads to two consequences for multinationals, if you think about it, right? So one is you could say, wow, wonderful, let's learn, right? So, we can do that, right? It's not rocket science, we can learn that as well and do this in other markets. Nothing wrong with being customer-centric, I suppose. The other consequence, of course, is in China, winning in China then becomes also, tricky, right? Because then there's a large number of companies that are obsessed with the customer, involve them. So you cannot come with a standard product from, maybe premium value, bring it to the market and win. It's not possible anymore. So interesting feature of Chinese innovators with, I think, implications for multinationals outside and inside China.
Absolutely. And being close to that customer, in the reality, as you said, means looping the client, the customer, the person, the human. Yeah, that's why a lot of, I think, forward-looking companies today call it human centricity versus customer centricity or client centricity, exactly. Right? So looping them in each process, starting from R&D to research to marketing to sales to right? And of course, you need to also build that relationship and evolve together with your customer. So that is why if somebody, I recently read an article where they were talking about African businesses doing fantastically well with private groups and doing D2C brands and personalized service through these, basically those micro enterprises really brought some of these TikTok mindsets, some of these private pool closed loop communications, and are succeeding in local markets beyond imagination. So of course we can learn, and of course we can also build it, but it also takes time, right? Your customer needs to be ready, and you need to be willing to go through this journey with them as well. Network mindset. Let's do one more, and then we switch to another question. Network mindset. What's that about?
Because it links so nicely to this, right? So if you just think about the job of an entrepreneur or a business executive, right, is you wanna build really cool value propositions that help your customers, have a positive impact in the society, and that's actually a difficult job, right? So one of the realizations that a lot of Chinese, I think, entrepreneurs and executives had was, why does it have to be something we just do alone? Right? Why is like me sitting in my office thinking about it, somebody else thinking about it? Why not work together? And I think there is at least from what I've can see, from the very beginning that we see private sector development, let's say the 1980s, 1990s onwards, there has always been this pragmatism in, we have a problem to solve, let's work together. And we can call it a network mindset. Others will call it an ecosystem mindset, where basically the idea is, how can we, with our joint capabilities, work together in providing the best possible value proposition, and by the way, make the best possible amount of growth, money, impact out of that as well. And I think that's something that, again, you'll find other companies in other parts of the world doing that. But the reality is it has become such an important component of how companies like TikTok, Alibaba, hire, from all sectors actually have been growing.
Come together. And I think here, when it comes to network mindset, we also need to see it for what it is, because there is a fair deal of competition and collaboration, and it is not mutually exclusive. Very often in the West, or let's say traditional Western mindset, it's like, okay, either there is a competitor, right, and I don't want to have anything to do with you, and I need to be protective, and I need to really go out there and basically fight, or there is a collaborator partner. In China,
Right.
I feel that there is a much higher percent of firms, companies, business models, and setup that allow mutual, ongoing collaboration and competition at the same time with
Exactly.
multiple players.
Exactly. And I think that's just one of the fascinating things, right? Because when you think about management, when you think about management innovation, obviously the role of a leader, the role of an executive, the role of an entrepreneur becomes very, very different, right? Because
Yeah.
suddenly, what we're doing with us, with our competitors, sometimes collaborators, it really changes the way that we manage and lead a company. It really changes the way that we think about strategy design and strategy execution. How do we manage stakeholders, right? So there's a lot of implications. And to be frank, I think there's a lot of lessons in there that also are valuable, whether you're in Africa, you're in the Middle East, you're in Europe or US, wherever, each every part of the world. Because fundamentally, what these companies are trying to do in this uncertain process of innovation is to try to lower the risks. And by working together with other companies, by thinking about how can we best leverage the talent inside and outside, we actually lower that risk of doing business as much as possible, despite that obviously, there is a lot of risk and there's a lot of challenges and there's a lot of, problems and crises around the whole time, the whole day, right? And actually, this is a really interesting point, right? Because recently, and especially in the post-COVID market and society, there's a large amount of challenges and crises for Chinese companies. And actually, when we ask and we talk with entrepreneurs here, especially the ones that have been working a bit longer, they say, yes, it's challenging. He says, but 10 years ago, it was also challenging. And 15 years ago, we had another challenge and there was another crisis. So there also seems to be a little bit of it's kind of like how it is,
Yeah,
and is
that's
that
how it
great?
is in
No,
business.
but we used it. It is. It's the truth of life for many of them, I think.
Absolutely. And let's step back a little bit and look at the bigger picture. So there are different types of innovation. It's an all-inclusive kind of term. They can be technological innovation, consumer product, business model innovation, leadership innovation, etc. When you look at China, where does China particularly excel today in your view? So where is it struggling, on the other hand, and can probably learn from the West, and where does it excel?
Right. So this is, if you look at I'd probably say last 20 years or so, we've seen China emerging as a manufacturing powerhouse, right? So, basically being the factory of the world in many ways. Then we saw that, maybe 10, 15 years ago, product innovation and technological innovation, in particular applied technology, becoming really a thing, right? And one could argue this is one of the reasons why, companies and countries, governments and entrepreneurs started to take China more seriously because, hey, suddenly it was not copy-paste, it was actually innovate the product and the technology. But I think in the last couple of years, you see that it goes beyond product and applied technology. We really see companies now starting to innovate, as we talked about, the business model, the management, the approach to management, and slowly some of the hardcore technologies, or so what's called deep technology. I think that there we have to be careful to say that not every company in China is good at product innovation. Many are, by the way. Not every company in China is now investing in deep technology either, right? So I think we have to look sector by sector. You think about a sector like biotechnology. China's deep technology and biotech ventures and companies are mind-blowing. And it is for many foreign companies, including pharmaceutical companies, the reason to look at China because of deep technology in that space. But of course, there's other sectors where maybe that is not yet the case. So I think when you look at innovation, I think we see that the focus of, what are we trying to invest in and to build up has changed, has moved from, fantastic production processes, right? Be very efficient and cheap, to building products and technologies that people want to buy. Now actually moving beyond that to start to think about innovating the organization, management, and you see definitely the results of deep technology. But again, careful, not across the board in certain sectors. And China, of course, in some sectors is also still struggling. We can talk about semiconductors. We can talk about large language models in generative AI. There's still lots and lots of things that need to be worked on. Where obviously China can leverage a global innovation network, so learning from other organizations, or indeed investing more on the long term domestically. So I think there's still quite a few things that the good news is we can learn both ways. So, and I think it's really, really important that we keep the both way, the double-sided street open for as long as we can.
Let's make it. I love this point. Let's make it easy for listeners. If you would name top 5 things, be it sectors, be it specific things that the world can learn from China, what would the 5 be?
I think for number 1 for sure is now automotive technology.
Automotive, yes.
So cars, EVs. I think number 2 for me would definitely be new materials. So we see lots and lots of development in new materials, including the parts that go into the semiconductor business. So this is a really good one. I think number 3, and this is not in order of importance, but the retail sector, the consumption, new retail sector is of course mind blowing, right? So if you want to know, hey, what's the future look like from retail? What is the future consumer going to do? China is there and has tried probably everything you can possibly try.
And at scale, they tried it at scale. They succeeded and they failed, and you can shorten your learning curve. That's what I always say.
But that's what it is, right? So I think for retail, this is called all over, right? Whatever format, online, offline, you want to find a really cool shopping mall offline, you'll find it in China, right? So the coolest live video, yes, also in China. So I think these are definitely 3 really big sectors for me. I think still, don't forget, the tech sector in China, despite the whole internet sector, the Alibabas and Tencents, they have been challenged, right? Challenged by regulation and competition. There's a new generation of tech companies coming up. Think about what the ByteDances and the Pinduoduos have been doing. Think about what new companies succeeding abroad, like Shein and Tmall, that are doing. So I think there's a really an important space to keep in mind. That the tech sector in China is
and the last
really
one?
The last one is a hard one. I'm
actually
going to say
green tech.
I would go for biotech, to be honest, and I tell you why. So biotech for me is an interesting one because it's a very fundamental tech area, right? That feeds into actually a lot of different sectors, right? Including obviously pharmaceuticals. And biotech is interesting because, we did this study at the school at IMD where we looked at who are the most competitive players in the pharmaceutical field in China. And obviously multinational companies do really well, right? Because they have been there for ages and they're global champions. But we see that, a little bit, below the top 5, within the top 10, the top 20, we see more and more Chinese homegrown biotech companies becoming pharmaceutical giants. And I think that's telling, because that is probably the industry which is most difficult to crack, because you have to be extremely patient with a lot of R&D, with a lot of clinical trials, with long ROIs, right? Takes a long time before you get actually a return on your investment. And even there, we start to see some really interesting developments. So I think for me, those are, definitely keep an eye on. 5 interesting sectors for the future.
And what are the 5 that China can learn from the world? Where are we still improving, catching up?
I think an interesting question. So I would certainly include in there semiconductors. This is the whole semiconductor value chain, the whole game around it. It's complicated. It takes time. It goes to me complexity higher than pharmaceutical and biotech. So this is one definitely where we are. I think there's a lot of work to do in AI and generative AI. So despite China having, in many cases, the data advantage,
a lot
we
of data.
also know a lot of data, and we can do a lot with data. We have seen it. Lots of companies are very good at it. But building world-class, with global appeal solutions is still going to take a little bit.
And what is the major challenge in that particular? Because AI right now is the topic, right?
That's
Last
right.
year, this year, it's all about Gen AI, Gen
That's right.
AI. So what is the challenge with China?
So I think there's two major challenges, right? I think on the one hand is I don't think the geopolitical situation as it is today helps, right? So it is hard for companies, Chinese companies, to learn from the West or from other parts of the world, and obviously there's also very little foreign competition in China. Because the Googles of the world
Yeah.
are not operating in China, right? And which, in my opinion, is a pity because I think that type of competition will actually push the boundary for everyone. I think that's one. I think the second one is data quality. So having a lot of data is great, but you also need to have really good data. And I think with the way that technology has developed, I think the quality of data is becoming more important than the quantity of data. And I think there is also some challenges, I think, in the Chinese context.
Absolutely. And
So
I agree because the Chinese internet is flooded by bots. Of course, there are bots, kind of around the world, but the sheer amount of content that is generated by bots and, again, data based on some of those conversations or messages or links can be extremely confusing and not helpful at all. So
that's right.
all this is very
That's right.
valid. So AI for sure, definitely semiconductors. What other things can China learn from the world?
So here's an interesting one, right? And so I always look at financial services and insurance companies, banks, and all of that. And for the longest time, I was looking at China like, wow, this is super cool, very digital, digitized, and all of that. Quite early to jump on the digital transformation curve, I think, in many cases. But recently, the last couple of years, I'm not seeing so many really interesting innovations when it comes to the financial service sector, and that's a pity, right? And it's not because of lack of trying, right? Companies like an Alipay from Alibaba or what we see in WeChat, it is amazing. It is still amazing, right? And there's all kinds of interesting things. But you cannot have one or two. Huh? You need to have a lot of companies that do this well. And I think the only exception for me in that picture of financial services is probably Ping An. Yeah, because Ping An has been early, but has been persistent, and is actually, I think, has been relatively successful in building what every insurance company wants to build, which is a health arm, right? So building a healthcare arm is really difficult for an insurance company, and I think they got as good as it gets. I think they got there. So that would be the exception. But I feel with what's going on in China, there's a lot of potential still to build a very innovative, vibrant,
finance. Anything else?
And
Any
actually,
other two?
let me think. I think other companies or other sectors. I was gonna say apparel originally, but I'm gonna take it back. So
okay. Why would you take it
apparel
back? Now I'm intrigued. Why?
So here's the thing, right? This is the thing with research, right? So if you just look at a company and you just look at a company and you do a little interview here and there and you read some notes, then you get an impression, right? An impression, for instance, an Anta or a Li Ning in China, and it's like, yeah, that's nice, but you'll not feel, wow, it's amazing. And then you compare it to Nike or Adidas and so on. But then when we did the research, so we were looking, and again, we do this project where we look at, how well companies are prepared for the future, companies in China. We look at 8 factors, 40 different variables, and we let the data talk. We find out that, for instance, an Anta is on par with a Nike in the Chinese market. Yeah, and they have done an amazing job in a very short period of time, not only revenue-wise. I'm not talking about the size or the market cap and all of that, but actually in building innovation capabilities. It is mind-blowing. So that's why I'm like, originally I was going to say apparel, but I'm like, actually, if I look at the data, I actually think, apparel is where we should be in the other category. It does remind me, though, even my own struggle with this, is that sometimes, we form opinions. Sometimes we know something, but we have to find evidence, right? So, that's why I'm obsessed with finding data on everything that we do, because sometimes, the data tells you a different story than you just imagine it is. And I think there's a lot to uncover when it comes to China and Chinese companies that we might have maybe the wrong impression of. So I'm also guilty of having the wrong impression sometimes.
Oh, we all do have biases, right? And that's why we need to constantly challenge ourselves and break through. That's beautiful. We both work in the ecosystem, yeah? And you've just now mentioned, we spoke about the network mindset, and sometimes it's called the ecosystems mindset. So let's start with that. How do we actually define an ecosystem? Because it is a all-inclusive, again, term that could mean just companies kind of coming and working together, or it can be an integrated ecosystem like Alibaba, that was broken down to 7 pieces. So how are Chinese ecosystems different from the West, and what are the future of ecosystems?
Yeah, so let's start with kind of like a definition or an understanding, right? My understanding. And I was actually lucky to meet and work with Dr. James Moore. So he was actually the founding father of the field of ecosystem thinking in originally from Harvard University. And he always talks about the biological metaphor that is connected to that, right? So it is about the sum is more than the parts. It is about collaborations and interdependencies. And I think one of the key elements that I always take as a core element or feature of an ecosystem, it's a lot of players, right? So it's us and others, and they somehow are interdependent, right? Which means that what I do influences you and what you do influences me. But what makes it a integrated or kind of like sustainable ecosystem is that there must be a form of a governance mechanism in between. And today that is typically a digital platform, a digital solution, almost like a kind of a glue that sticks together all the pieces of the ecosystem. And so for me, those are the elements that an ecosystem needs to fulfill. And very important that the center of an ecosystem is never a company, right? It's always around whoever we're trying to serve, right? It could be a citizen in a country. It could be a consumer in a particular sector, or it could be a manufacturer if it's in a business-to-business ecosystem. So I think it's always around like, let's together solve the problem better. And we do that in a smart way, which means we need to have some form of a digital platform in between that governs how we work together. So for me, I think it's important, because then when we look at an Alibaba, or you look at a Haier, or you look at a Ping An, you'll find that those features are all, in fact, all there.
How do you then view, let's say, Chinese ecosystems versus Western, right? So is Meta an ecosystem? Yes, it's following that definition. It has various services that kind of depend on each other. But when I look at it, I also feel it is a company. It is a company. So is Meta an ecosystem, right? Compared to, let's say, Baba, or is Amazon an ecosystem? Maybe that's a better example, obviously, of ecosystem. So Disney Plus being an ecosystem. And ultimately, how are they built, or how are they evolving differently in different parts of the world?
Right. So I think for sure there's lots and lots of ecosystems around the world, right? So the notion of an ecosystem is not unique to China. I think what is unique to China is the speed by which they grow and the scale that they reach, and the diversity that you find, right? So in many cases, the Chinese ecosystem compared to, let's say, an Amazon ecosystem or an ecosystem of a Grab, for instance, in Asia, is that they tend to be almost like little economies, right? So they are, kind of like cover almost everything. And that's something that was, well and okay for the longest time, right? This is why some of these companies grow very, very big. But obviously being an economy also has challenges, right? And you see that now, and we can talk about that, if you like, happening with companies like an Alibaba, right? Where the economy sometimes is a bit too ambitious for a company to orchestrate. So I think there are some differences there. I think the other big difference for me is the use of technology, not so much as in driving new solutions or new products, but more using the technology internally, like as an internal engine, like a middleware engine to, I would say, automate, everybody and their uncle, right? So everything you can automate, everything you can put on that internal like engine is being done in a lot of those ecosystems that you find in China. Different example, totally different company would be Handu. So H Style, which is in a fashion lifestyle brand. It's an e-commerce company as well as a platform. really interesting way how they leverage exactly that internal, let's say, platform, if you like, to automate almost every function in the organization, let them work autonomously, build their own teams, build their products, launch their products, without any friction that you typically find in larger ecosystems or larger companies, right? So I think that use is very smart, and there's this thing that we wrote about it for HBR with George Yip and Catherine Sin on. It allows one feature that we don't so much find in other markets, which is we call it DIDA. So it's a weird abbreviation, but it basically means digitally enhanced directed autonomy. And I think that's something I would say relatively unique to a Chinese ecosystem. Not sure if that makes sense. What I do know is that it's probably going to change. So we have this conversation.
It is going to change. This is very exciting. The DIDA, the digitally enhanced
directed autonomy.
Directed autonomy is going to change. How is it going to change? What is the future of ecosystems? Are they going to be enormous economies? Are they going to be broken down? What is your vision?
So here's the thing, right? So an ecosystem is continuously evolving, right? And without any guardrails, an ecosystem is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And then at some stage, somebody's going to say, which could be a government or a competitor, no, this is enough, right? And then we see that big gets too big, and an economy becomes almost unmanageable. It's very, very hard to orchestrate. So what you see now, and I think what we see playing out partly with Alibaba, is actually this maturing, going to this next growth phase of the company after 25, 30 years, where maybe that model is not wrong, but it needs to be adjusted to today's reality. And ecosystems in China have always lived on a fast-growing total market space. Now the market is no longer growing so fast. So the ecosystem needs to evolve, which in many cases means we need to maybe get a little bit closer to our core capabilities. We maybe need to scope down a little bit, and that's okay, right? Is it painful? Of course, it's painful. And, we're gonna see, cutting off pieces of the ecosystem. We might divest, certain arms, and that's sad, right, for everybody involved. But I think it is a natural thing, given that if the context changes, the ecosystem has to evolve and respond to that. So I think we'll see quite a bit of that. And as always, some companies are a little bit front of the pack, right? And they're a little bit more known, they get more attention. But obviously, the ones below the sea level will also feel that. It is more and more important to innovate, go back to the basics. Make sure you're sustainable and resilient in a slower growing economy.
Yeah. And I think this is a fantastic message for everyone who is involved in not just China business with the slowing market realities, but also global business. Look at where our economy is today.
Exactly.
And you need to adjust. You need to navigate the hype cycles, navigate the consumer sentiments, navigate the geopolitical uncertainties, and the fact that at one point the financial systems also will have to play out the recession and crisis that we have still not had, despite all the very significant challenges that were brought upon us in the recent years. That's all beautiful. Now, when it comes to being on the ground in China, as we are, talking about the economy and all that, the media reports, when it comes to anything related to China business, are doom and gloom. And the sentiment is very, very bleak, it seems, from the media reports. How does it feel on the ground? Do you think they are justified? How do you view 2024 in general context of China, and of course in a specific focus of innovation?
Got it. Yeah. So I'm also not super optimistic. So I have been more optimistic about China's economy in the past. But I think the reality is that there's lots and lots of challenges, right? And I think if I look at some key indicators, right? So last year, if you look at the numbers, we see still a reasonable growth despite challenges in the real estate sector, despite export being, basically being a little bit curtailed in many ways and forms. So, that in a way is a good sign, right? And if you look at some of the most recent manufacturing numbers, you see some small signals of, maybe we're going to get there. Now, is that enough? I do not know. And I think there's two things that need to happen to turn that tide positively. I think one thing is we're going to have the two sessions coming up in March. This is an important political event in China, where we basically hope to see, I think, only one thing, just clarity, direction and clarity, and that's enough. Because honestly, if it's good news, it's bad news, it doesn't matter. It's at least it's clear. And I think that is going to push the one thing that the Chinese economy needs now most, which is consumer confidence, right? Money is not the problem. There is enough money in China. Capability, not a problem. Fantastic companies, they're there, right? Everything is there. But it's like kind of like, how do we unlock that? And I think the only thing is with a lot more clarity. And I am an optimistic person. I am hopeful. I see when I talk to entrepreneurs around me, including large companies that we work with in Shenzhen or in Shanghai or in Beijing, we do see that, like, we can make it. We've been through challenges before. We can make this. And we have an entrepreneurial, agile mindset. But yes, it is really tiring. And yes, it is a challenge. So I do think that, cautiously optimistic, because I really believe in the Chinese entrepreneurial mindset. But again, not without some pain. So we're going to see also more companies failing. We're going to see more bankruptcies, and that's unfortunately that's the reality of an economy that is transforming. Which is something. Yeah. And that transformation is very normal and will happen anyhow. It's just it happens to happen now. So now we're here.
Absolutely. And I think there's, just to highlight what you've said, there are two important messages. Number one, March is coming, and everybody's looking for clarity, because the worst thing in business is uncertainty, right? So as you said, doesn't matter if it's good or bad, doesn't matter whether we're in between, gray area, whatever. Clarity, stability is important, because then we are able to plan, pivot, and ultimately evolve. And number two thing that you've mentioned is that everybody is focusing, including the companies, the brands, and of course the government, is focusing on consumer sentiment. Because what was making China so unique and special for so many years, 30 years, was the optimism. We operated out of a very strong belief that tomorrow is going to be better than today, because people's life changed year after year, and it always gotten better. Right now, due to obviously COVID-19 and other challenges, geopolitical and others, people don't know whether it's actually going to get better or worse. So for the first time in 30 years, people look at it and say, you know what, I really would like to, save and kind of wait and see and not splash it out. So yes, hopefully with some stability, we can also, one way or another, get this sentiment a bit more on a higher scale and start moving ahead. We are almost at the end of our talk. So I would like to, first of all, ask you, what is one topic that we have not discussed today that we should have discussed in the context of China innovation technology? What is one question maybe that I should have asked, but I have not yet asked you?
No, I think we covered a lot of really interesting ground, right? And I think there's always a lot more to talk about. So for me, I really look at China as a space for finding innovations, in particular management innovation. And of course, one question that one might ask is like, so how long is that going to take still, right? So how are we going to see significant new management innovations coming from China? And the answer is I don't know. But we need to do a lot of research, a lot of studies, and a lot of communication with Chinese companies, Chinese entrepreneurs, and customers, consumers, to know the answer. So for me, it's like, if you ask me what's next, what should be done, I think is dive deeper, embed further in the Chinese market, which is exactly what we are doing as IMD, and also me personally, because I feel despite all the challenges, despite all the potential competition, collaboration, whatever it is, China is here to stay, has always been here, will always be here. And the only way, and that would be always my next step, is to get deeper, more involved, and make sure that we inspire other people to stay engaged and involved with China, Chinese business, and Chinese people. So maybe that's the only thing we didn't talk about, but we kind of did in a way. So.
Ah, that is beautiful. And I also would like to invite people to read your recent IMD China Innovation Indicator. Would you like to tell us about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So in an attempt to be a little bit more evidence-based and trying to understand what's happening in China, both qualitatively, but in particular also quantitatively with data, we actually launched an indicator which looks at sectors, which looks at companies, the top performing companies in the sector, both foreign and domestic companies. And we try to understand them in a very holistic way. So all public data, so no opinions, no expert panels, all public data. You can check all the algorithms if you like. And then we try to find out which company is doing well and will keep doing well in the future, and which ones are the ones that we need to worry about. So that's a study that we've started now for our F&B sector, so food and beverage, pharmaceuticals, apparel. We look at the technology sector as well, and we're going to have coming up automotive, new materials in the next couple of months. So we actually just launched a while back the first indicator. So very happy to look at our website or
where
read our
can people
newsletter
find it?
on that. So if you search IMD China, you'll find in Google or wherever you search in, you'll find the website of the IMD China initiative. So a very big welcome to see what we do on that front.
Guys, get the indicator, check it out, check out what Mark and the team have put together in terms of predictors, right? And also featuring a couple of companies and of course the future. Mark, the last question for today is, for 2024, what are your 3 most important things where your whole focus goes, where your hope goes, that the 3 sectors, the 3 topics that you're most excited about in 2024?
So for me, the 3 key topics for 2024 are number 1. I mean, it has to be the automotive sector. I mean, automotive is fascinating, dynamic, and it's changing again, right? So number 1, I think is definitely automotive sector. Number 2 is actually deepening our understanding of the hidden champions. So I'm going to do a lot of work with Chinese companies that are, not necessarily the Huawei's and Haiers and Alibaba's. Actually, what's that next wave of innovators that's going to come up? And I think that's for me is going to be a really big focus for 2024. And the last focus is actually very simple. Actually, is connecting more in our ecosystem, including with you, Ashley, and everybody that is looking at us. Really build a strong ecosystem of China enthusiasts, China observers, and China participants to really jointly make sense. Because I think more sense making will have everybody involved. So that's going to be my 3 things for this year.
This is beautiful. This is beautiful. Thank you so much, Mark, for being with us today. This is it for today. I hope you found it insightful. Stay tuned for more Ashley's Digital China episodes to come. Drop your topic ideas in the comments below and remember to hit that subscribe button with a bell. Looking forward to seeing you soon and have a great day.